Hello, everybody, and welcome to Humans of Wharton, the How podcast and YouTube channel. And we're very thrilled to have Eli Kennedy with us, Wharton MBA 2004, and co-hosted by me and Sean.
Hey, everybody.
Welcome, Eli. How are you doing today?
I'm doing all right, mid-pandemic or whatever. It seems like there's some light at the end of the tunnel, so doing all right. Not vaccinated yet, but looking forward to it. All right.
Sounds awesome. So maybe we'll start with a little bit of your story. Maybe you'll share some background with us.
Sure. So I'm trying to think where to start. I grew up on a little street in Berkley, California, called Edward Street, where I actually live now.
Wow.
I grew up in a home where my father worked for the city of Berkeley. My mother worked as a teacher in Oakland. And I had sort of a community of people around me the whole time. It was a wonderful little block where there were a lot of people who took interest in me and supported me through different things in my life. People that came to my graduations and gave me my first jobs and a whole bunch of stuff like that. So it was a really nice place to grow up. So two things about that kind of shape where I've gone and what I've done since then. One was this sort of sense of duty to a community like that, because so many people put effort into me and really cared and loved me when I was young. And the second thing was my mother was a teacher, so I was very into education at a really early age. My first or second job was tutoring other kids, and so that was something that was always known and important to me. And then the last thing I think to know about that is there was also one of the reasons my parents chose to live in Berkeley as opposed to Oakland was that Berkeley had really good schools. So they used that effort to sort of pick a house, pick a school district, all that was going to be a good opportunity for their children. And what I saw as a kid growing up was you had these schools in Berkeley where most of the kids kind of go on to college and whatnot. And, an artificial barrier away, Oakland, 1 or 2 miles away, far fewer kids were going to college. Most of the schools were at the time what people called dropout factories. There were 1 or 2 schools that really were thriving at the time. So
that's horrible.
That's a little bit of my background. Let me keep going.
Absolutely, yes.
All right. Yeah. So my junior year of high school, skip forward a little bit, I applied for a summer program that was at Howard University. It was an actuarial science program, which is something I had no interest in, but was really, really interested in going to Washington, D.C. and seeing this college in person for 3 weeks. So I got on a plane by myself and flew to Washington, D.C. and stayed in the dorms and took boring ass actuarial classes every day. And one day even decided, hey, I'm not getting up this morning, and almost got kicked out of the program. And it was I had a good time. But the reason I bring that up is it was formative for me because it was that experience of being there, being on that campus in the Black college environment that led me to go to that school 2 years later when I went to college. I had spent that summer there and then went on to go to 4-year college there and had a wonderful experience there. The other thing, this is just a random aside, was I did play baseball for my whole life. So I had an uncle who got me really into baseball when I was like 7 years old. I used to collect baseball cards and was the little kid that threw a ball I threw it against my front steps every morning and just caught the ball. But I played baseball my whole life. I eventually was able to play baseball at Howard. So that was a lot of fun also. Made a bunch of friends doing that. And that also got I have a 10-year-old daughter now. And one of the things I always encourage her to do is around team sports. And she's a much better athlete and much bigger than me and all that. But the reason I want her to play, some of it's about, the college scholarships and all that potential. But most of it is you really learn how to deal with different people. You really develop your leadership abilities, all that, sort of being in that sports environment, you deal with pressure. you deal with, again, like different personalities, people who come from really different backgrounds, people that are having bad days. But you work with a group of people towards a goal. And it's just that was a formative experience for me too. It really helped me be a lot more confident in different environments, to sort of have been through, pretty high pressure stuff in a sporting context.
Wow, thanks for that story. I feel like that was, I like, it just seemed like you like came so prepared with. What then made you want to go to Wharton? Like, what attracted you about Wharton? What did you know about it? Yeah, like how did that transition kind of go?
Yep. So it's funny, when I graduated undergrad, I was 22 years old. I went to work for Andersen Consulting in their strategic services practice. Andersen Consulting doesn't exist anymore. It's a company called Accenture now, as most of your listeners will know. And before I went there, I really had not heard of MBA programs at all. Like, I didn't know they existed. I had no idea how it kind of fit into your timeline. But when I went to this consulting firm, they paid me at the time $46,000, which was a huge sum of money back in 1996 when I got out of school. But I also was really interested in sort of seeing and wrestling with lots of different types of challenges. But one thing about the consulting team structure is that there's, I was at the time an analyst. And so there's an analyst and there's a consultant, and then there's the whole, the consultant, the associate partner, the partner. Everything above me all had MBAs. And one of the things that the firm was really strong about was sort of talking about that MBA process, talking about the value of that. There was some transparency about how much money people made, right? So there was also, like, again, like for me, who is I'm not a first generation college student, but I'm a first generation professional. The understanding like how much money people made was something that I didn't even really fully grasp in some ways, or know how you climb that ladder. So when I got there and I was like, cool, I make $46,000 a year. And I was like, this guy who's doing like work that's like 5% more than mine is making $130,000 a year and got a $200,000 package to come out of an MBA. I was like, okay, I got to think about that. And then getting, obviously there was a whole progression, right? So when you learn about partners that are making millions of dollars a year, and you're like, okay, like this is now, I kind of got to figure this out a little bit. Andersen was a really cool place to like get your career started, because you got to, like I said, wrestle with, like, I had a project every 6 months or so, a new industry, new subject matter, lots of like formal training on Excel and PowerPoint, all that stuff, decision trees, like a really great place to start your career. But they also did a thing for their analysts where they would bring in, like, they did like a 2-day workshop on how to apply to an MBA. So that also really helped me. That made that process, sort of demystified that process for me in a way that was really, really helpful. And then obviously I worked with a whole bunch of people who had MBAs, so they knew how to write recommendations and could guide me and help me with my essays and, all that stuff. So I didn't, at this point, when I'm 22, I don't know that I want to go into education. I'm kind of interested in money. I'm starting my career. I thought I maybe wanted to be a little bit more of an entrepreneur. I didn't know what I wanted to do. So it just sort of seemed, again, it kind of got it banged in my head, right, by the leadership at Andersen, that like the thing that you do after you're an analyst is you go get an MBA, right? And so that's what I did basically, was to sort of apply to Wharton, became interested in Wharton. I didn't know, I only applied to Wharton, Harvard, and Stanford. I actually applied to them in 3 separate years. So each year I only applied to one school. I didn't know a ton about Wharton at the time, except for the one thing I'll say, and this will resonate with your podcast listeners, was like, I worked with people from HBS. They were a little snotty. I worked with people from Stanford. They thought they were a little too smart, and it wasn't, the Wharton people were the people that I vibed with like immediately. That could be totally random or maybe not, but the people that I worked with at Andersen who were from Wharton, or there's some other schools also, but of those like top tier schools, those are the people that I connected with, that I like would have a beer with, a drink with, ask for help, were supportive, like just kind of the people that reached out to me, and that helped shape my perspective also.
So it was ultimately the people that drew you to Wharton.
Yeah,
I mean,
it was it was the structure that drew me to the MBA, the people that drew me to Wharton, and then like I got in. So that's the other thing. We didn't go to Wharton.
Right?
So, Wharton, the friendliest business school.
Exactly. Don't Wharton. Yeah.
We'll get that sponsorship now. There we
Yeah.
go.
Nobody will believe us. But yeah, I agree completely.
Yeah. I mean, in my experience there, I mean, looking back, it's interesting because I talked to a lot of young people who are like, I kind of want to get an MBA, and like about their choices. And one of the things I say about Wharton is it's not just that like everybody's nice, even though people were really nice. One of the things I really liked was it was a big school, so it was like you could find like I was able to take a nonprofit leadership class there because we have whatever across our two classes, 1,800 people or 1,600 people, whatever the number is. So the school was able to offer things that are interesting to lots of different little niches, which like at the time when Stanford was much smaller, they had 250 students. Like they couldn't offer all these little things, So like there were like 17 people in my class. So there was like a community that also was thinking about nonprofits when, even if like the reputation of Wharton is, everyone's going into finance and banking, like, okay, there's that 40%, but then that 60% is still dealing with such a large number that there are lots of little niches of people doing interesting little things. And I just found that really valuable to be able to find different types of community at Wharton.
I want to ask you, because it seems I wasn't sure at kind of like at what point in your career education and getting involved in NGOs was big, because I think you might have mentioned or undergrad, well, you worked in consulting, so you had the corporate experience right out of undergrad, but I know that you were always surrounded by education, your mother being an educator.
I did. When I got to Wharton, I knew I wanted to do something different. I wasn't like, so even though I had a great experience at Anderson starting my career, and then after that worked in tech a little bit, I wasn't fulfilled by it in any way. It was still a little bit of a slog. Like I can even remember, there were, when I was in consulting, it was like we flew out every Monday, come back every Thursday, which early on was great. I got to travel, see lots of people, blah, blah, blah. I can remember there was one morning where I was like, I had worked all night in New Orleans, was like, I walk out of the hotel, people are coming in with hurricane glasses, like I'm going to work. Like, and it was like, I saw the same people like going out. They were going out when I came in at like 4 a.m. or whatever. And they were coming in when I was going out, and they're just like, and I was just like, for some reason, I just like driving in my car and just was like overwhelmed and like literally started crying. I was like, I'm not happy doing this. You know what I mean? And so I knew when I eventually was going to go back to business school, I was going to use it as a little bit of a pivot to do something that was closer to me. Going in, I wasn't quite sure what that was. Like, I didn't know if I was like, all right, I really want to be an entrepreneur. I want to do something nonprofit, impact. Some point during my freshman year, I decided it was going to be that more, like have an impact, right? Like I wanted to do well and do good. I remember going to like a World Bank meeting. That was like the only info session I ever went to at Wharton, for a company info session. They were like packed, standing room only. People like and they were like, you need to speak 3 languages, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, okay, I'm out of here,
Damn.
Yeah.
3 languages.
Yeah. And then I can also remember being recruited. There were a couple companies that just like, saw my resume or whatever, and were like calling me. So I didn't, but I just didn't want to go that path. After my first year, during my first year, I still wasn't really quite sure what I wanted to do. I worked at an economic development organization that was doing lending and like an incubator in West Philadelphia to try to help businesses of color get off the ground. That was good. I liked it. It was challenging, but I liked it. And I was going to do that actually before I made my final choice. But the big switch, actually, the thing that sort of really turned me back to education, interestingly enough, was a class at Wharton. There was a class called Urban Fiscal Policy with a professor named Peter Inman. I don't know if he's still there or not. It was a fascinating, really interesting class where Professor Inman basically focused on, if you are running a city, making policy within a city, what are the things that you have to deal with? What are you responsible for? And sort of what are the solutions? What should you implement? And so we went through all this, like, all right, there's crime, there's poverty, there's a sort of cleanliness of the city, there's security, there's a bunch of these different issues. And we would go through all these little like short-term policies. So for crime, you'd look at like hotspot policing. Does that work? And like sort of. But really the long-term thing that we kept coming back to when we were looking at all these different problems in cities was education. And so if you have a city with a more educated populace, essentially you're going to have less crime, you're going to have higher income levels, you're going to have better education, you're going to have all these different things. Like that is the long-term fix. And that really sort of turned me towards like, maybe I should take a stronger look at education. And then at the time, there was actually a Wharton grad, a guy named Gene Wade, who was starting a company called Platform Learning, which was a after-school tutoring company, but one that served public school students. It's a complicated thing. It was part of the No Child Left Behind law. And he came to our class, and I don't remember if it was urban fiscal policy or something else, but anyway, he came to one of my classes, spoke, and I was like, boom, I want to do that. And went up to him and talked to him afterward, and got a job sort of running the West Coast in that for that tutoring company, which was interesting and good and a lot of fun. The company didn't succeed. I'll spare the reasons why. It's a hard space. But I found for myself, I worked so hard those first 2 years, basically like trying to work with school districts. We'd hire all these teachers, pay them. At some point I had a team of like 30 full-time people and like thousands of teachers who were paying on a daily basis, not daily basis, every other week to sort of tutor these kids after school. And I worked really hard, and it was nerve-wracking. Again, like I can remember sitting in a movie theater with my wife and just being like, tomorrow's payday. We got to pay all these people. I'm going to get 50,000 calls because these checks are going to be off by 75 cents, and just like I couldn't focus. Like it was really hard. But I had it was a great way for me to get on the ground and like kind of get in on education, understand it a little bit. I was really proud of our work because what we did after school was, young people, we were sitting down, reading, doing math. The program we worked in like east of Los Angeles in like the San Bernardino area primarily. That area is a like kind of forgotten part of the world in some ways. Like those kids, that's a community that really struggles, great people, but like there's just not much there. So we were doing this after school tutoring, our kids reading, their other after school program. I remember one day watching, and it was like 30 kids playing like some version of softball with a tennis racket. And the reading levels in this place are like 20% of these kids are on level, maybe lower than that. So I knew what we were doing was like powerful and having an impact. But the thing that was challenging for me, and the thing that I've wrestled with a lot in my career was, look, we're helping kind of one kid at a time, but it's really hard to do systemic, like high level change across the country, just doing this little piece. And that's something that I've wrestled with a lot in my career of like, how do you have a high level impact and then also like a ground level impact? That's one of the real challenges in education. So anyway, so that was my entree into education. My entree into the nonprofit sector was working at a foundation called the Broad Foundation, which was founded by a billionaire named Eli Broad, who was like KB Homes and Sun America, really important philanthropist, especially as it comes to education. So I went to work for his foundation after working at the tutoring organization for a couple of years. That was really interesting also. Like this was my effort at like popping up into like a policy level, right? So like we were from a philanthropic standpoint, he didn't do, hey, we're sending some books to this little school or whatever. Like we were working at the top level with whoever the top, like we were working with Joel Klein in New York, we were working with Michelle Rhee in Washington, D.C., like the superintendent, top level leaders of school districts with tens and hundreds of thousands of kids. In the case of New York, 1 million kids. We were working with Arnie Duncan in Chicago, Michael Bennett in Colorado. So we were at the top level trying to help them think through policies and changes that could really drive change across their whole school district. So where the lever of change was not, one group of kids who were playing softball with a tennis racket versus reading, the lever of change was a district with, again, like hundreds of thousands of kids. Can we change that? So that was that was a really interesting, cool, in some ways frustrating experience. But that was my entree into nonprofit, was really like leveraging Mr. Eli Broad's philanthropy to try to drive change in school districts. And we did, we would do stuff like we would invest in Michael Bennett, who's now the senior senator from Colorado, wanted to build a performance management system and improve his HR systems in Denver. We'd do stuff like that. I worked closely with Michelle Rhee and her team when she was trying to change the way teachers were paid in Washington, D.C., essentially enable teachers to make $120,000 a year, which was like revolutionary at the time, but also to be accurately assessed, so that if you're really good at your job, you can make lots of money. If you weren't good at your job, you didn't get to keep your job. Because I don't know if you guys know this, but like in education, teachers are evaluated, but the numbers are essentially 99% are excellent, across their evaluations. Again, in most of these urban school districts, the kids are reading at 20-30% are on grade level. So there's something.
There's a disconnect there. Yeah.
But that was a really interesting look at like how to change things. There's things that we did that I wouldn't do. Not everything works that you do, right? So there's things I wouldn't focus on there, like if I was to do it again. But I enjoyed my time there because it was, this opportunity to do these high level things. And like the pay thing in DC is still something I'm super curious about. Like could you dramatically improve the quality of education by attracting and keeping a more skilled professional in the teaching profession? So that was great. And then again, like the people we were interacting with it was really cool. Like I'm just being honest. Like it was, Michael Bennett, who's the senior senator from Colorado, had his feet up on my desk, and we're sitting there talking about whatever. Really cool guy. Michelle Rhee, I saw her on the street not long ago. She comes over, gives me a hug. It's awesome. Arnie Duncan, I got to work there. I got to actually work in the Obama administration for about 6 months as an executive on loan. I got to work with and know cool people, and they were like at that time there was a bit of a, I don't know, someone coined this, but like a celebrity culture of superintendents at that time. There were superintendents like Joel Klein, people that were coming in from outside other industries or sort of non-traditional paths to come in and run school districts. So there was Joel in New York, who drove a ton of change. Arnie Duncan in Chicago, who eventually became Secretary of Education. Michelle Rhee in DC, and then there were some here in Oakland. There was a guy named Randy Ward. There was John Dacey in LA. But I interacted with all these people, and it was really cool being around. Having that level of access to those people who are really, really smart. And then a bunch of really cool nonprofit leaders also I got to meet along the way, like Wendy Kopp, and who's the founder of Teach for America, and other people like that.
You make NGO Korea sound sexy.
I don't know if it's
seriously.
Tell us about the Obama administration.
That was interesting. So I worked there there was a point where I was at Broad. I was at Broad for 4 years. And my last year, I was just like, I'm tired of this. During my third year, I did this thing with Michelle Rhee. It was the biggest grant we had ever done on the education side of the foundation. But I just got to this point where I feel like my story was told there. I was kind of wanted to do something else. At the same time, President Obama's elected, and I'm really excited about that, right? Like I was super excited about like first black president. I actually got to meet him. I had this weird, if you'll indulge me for a second on a story. I had a friend who was involved in like Democratic politics in Los Angeles. And so he calls me at like 10 o'clock one day and he said, hey, there's this lunch, Senator Obama at that time is going to be here for this like fundraising thing. And it's like, $1,500 or something again. He's like, just if you can give $100, it's all good. So we go, it's in like someone's backyard in LA, right? And I'm still the whole time, I'm like, he's not coming here. This is bullshit. We're sitting in this backyard, and it's a very nice backyard with a pool and all that. But like, it's like 40 people or something. And we're sitting there, we're standing by the pool. I'm talking to a couple other people. There's like some people there though. So like, you'll have to indulge me on a few different parts of the story. But anyway, so Obama comes in and they introduce him as the next president of the United States. And the first thing that went through my head was like, nope, not ever going to happen. I couldn't believe it at that time. And that's a lot of history and there's a lot of reasons. It's different now, but at the time, I believe there would never be a black president. So anyway, they introduce him, he does his speech, he walks off, he comes over, shakes my hand. So back to the story. It's
Obama.
It's 2008. I did a little campaigning for Obama. I was really excited about it. I wanted to get involved. Arne Duncan is named Secretary of Education, and we had for a long time funded different activities for him in Chicago. So Eli Broad he's like building his team. And it's really complicated when you build an administration team because people require approvals or whatever. But there are, you can second somebody into the administration. So basically you can send someone over kind of like for free who can work as like, I don't even remember what our titles were, but it was like analyst or I don't know, advisor or something. So I went there with another colleague, Naja, who she eventually went back there and worked there for a number of years, led a huge part of the department. So we went there in 2009, early 2009, and I was there for about 6 months. Was really excited about politics and whatnot. We were helping with the strategy for the Department of Education. So we had like a McKinsey team. We were managing like an 8-person McKinsey team. That was doing a bunch of analysis on different things that could happen that we could do from a policy perspective. The other thing you'll remember is that at the time, there was the American ARRA, whatever it was, the stimulus, they called it, the Recovery Act. So a huge part of that was education. So there was a lot of work on that also of like, what can we do to, push more money into education, but also at the same time to try to change the system. And that was one thing that that Arne Duncan as Secretary of Education was big on, like, let's try to be impactful as we can. So yeah, that was kind of the work we were doing. That experience, however, was like super not for me. Like the people there were really cool. The notion that people in government don't work hard, that's like the hardest I've ever worked. Like, it was insane. Because you would go, it was all meetings every day from like 8 to 6. Everyone is new. So you have to, like, no one knows really even what their job is or how they're doing it. So it's a little dysfunctional. So you'd have meetings with like 40 people in them, like huge meetings in the secretary's office where there's like, the secretary's office has a 30-foot long table that's fully surrounded and then a back bench all on the side. And everyone's in there. And the weird thing is, like, because no one really knew what their job was and there was information that would fly around, like, you could miss it if you weren't in a meeting. Like, you just basically weren't sure which meetings you needed to go to and you didn't. So you go to all the meetings, and everyone kind of had that approach, and it was insane. So you'd be in huge meetings where you wouldn't talk, maybe you'd ask one question in 8 hours of meetings with 1,000 people in them. All day. And then you couldn't like start any actual work until you sat down at your desk at 6 p.m. at night. And those people work crazy hard, like, really hard. So, for that, again, like, it's, no one knows their job. You're mashing together. It's almost like a merger. Like, you're mashing together people from like the political side, people from the education side, and then this like huge existing infrastructure, whatever. It's a gigantic building. The building's the size of a block, the Department of Education. which is full of career folks. So all of them are, again, like really smart, know how to get things done. A little siloed sometimes, but it's just like a lot of people coming together at once. I found it to be a really challenging environment for myself. It was also, for me, it just didn't match my skill set. Like the level of diligence you have to do to like make policy, of like thinking through every different permutation, sort of doing the work around like getting a whole bunch of different people on board as you go along. Like it just didn't match. I didn't have the patience for it, to be honest. And it just didn't match my skill set. I mean, it's really, really important work, and there's real reasons why it needs to work that way. I wasn't good at it. So, I had people ask me like, hey, do you want to stay? And I was like, I gotta go. Like, I can't, I'm working too hard. And, I was like, so after 6 months, I was like, hey, I'm going to go back, So yeah, that was working there.
That didn't work out, but you're still in the space. I think our listeners would love to hear about like what you're doing now. You started this organization, Smash. What was the story of this organization, and kind of what's the mission? What are you guys doing now?
So even before I got to Smash, I was a CEO of another nonprofit that was one of our grantees of the Broad Foundation, and the CEO resigned, and he asked me, I was on the board also, he asked me to step in as interim CEO. At that time, I was a little unclear on exactly what needed to be done to fix education, but was very much like, I want to cut my teeth at the leadership level, like really be a CEO, try this thing. So I went to work there right out of Broad. The CEO he painted a picture of what was happening in the organization that was far more optimistic than what was actually happening. Like I had to make some cuts and sort of redirect the strategy. It ended up being a turnaround job. And I did. I turned it around and grew it in a way that I'm really proud of. And that sort of sparked something in me. Like I think I've said when I was at Anderson, sort of pre-business school, I just wasn't like proud of my work. I wasn't proud of either like the grand scale work that I was doing or like my personal impact on the work. But doing this turnaround thing at this organization, Pacific Charter School Development, I was really proud of that. It was something that resonated with me. I could see my own impact. So, when I eventually left there and I went to work for an ed tech company, and then I was beginning another job search and wanted to be in an organization that was having a big impact, but also one where I could feel my personal impact. So I didn't start Smash. Smash existed before me, but they were looking for a CEO to dramatically grow the organization beyond the footprint that it had when I joined in, what year was that? 2015 or 16, one of the two. So that's sort of how I found my way there. Smash. So Smash is much more about, trying to create opportunity for low-income students of color. The belief about it is that, like, look, if you actually look at the profile of a young person that ends up at Google, that's a person that's like had their interest in coding and STEM and tech nurtured from the time they were like as young as like 6 years old or younger even, right? They're getting Legos, they're getting coding things, they're building computers, they're going to summer camps, after school programs, really high quality elementary and middle schools. Like, it's a lot of time and a lot of money, right? So it can be hundreds of thousands of dollars. And the reality is, if you look at a kid that's like hiding under our noses here in Oakland or in the Bronx or wherever, like that kid has had no money or time invested in them by the time they get there. And the thing we've heard, like I've literally heard someone tell me this story one time who was like a recruiter, I won't name the tech company, but she was like, we're looking for a kid who's just like grabbed themselves by their bootstraps, taught themselves how to code and whatever. And I'm like, look, I saw that movie. That's called Good Will Hunting. These aren't the kids that are ending up working at your place. These are the kids that end up working there have had their genius, their interest in STEM nurtured from a really young age. So coming back to Smash, so our whole goal is to like spend 3 years trying to catch up to all those additional resources that have been provided to these affluent kids, to these low-income kids of color who haven't had the same resources injected in them. And that's the whole thing. So we're just trying to level that playing field in tech, give those young people the types of supports that they need so they can have a level playing field with their peers from affluent communities. The way that we do that is we spend the entire, or 3/4 of a student's high school career with them. The bulk of that work occurs during a summer. We put our young people on college campuses. They live in dorms for 5 weeks at a time. We have programming from the time they wake up at 8 a.m. till they go to sleep, sometimes 10 o'clock at night. Really, really long, intense days. We do a mix of work that is quantitative, of just like, let's get you better at math, get you better at computer science, at the physical sciences. We do a lot of applied work. So a lot of like thinking about how we can use STEM and its disciplines to drive change. So a lot of our young people are very committed to, like, we want to improve the world. And so at an early age, we're trying to show them, all right, let's do a project that leverages math, computer science, whatever, to do something to drive some social good. So we do a lot of that. We do a lot of career exposure work. So bringing in people from the outside who look like these young people who have walked a similar path so that they understand, like, A, I can make it the way this person has. And B, they get to learn about careers that they had no idea about. Again, like me, I'm not a first generation college student. I didn't know what consulting was when I was 18 years old. I didn't know, and to be totally honest, I didn't really know what investment banking was. I remember I was being recruited by Goldman Sachs, and the woman was like, what do you think investment banking is? And I was like, I don't know, trading stocks and bonds. And she was like, read it, or go learn about it and call me back, see if you really want to do it. Like, I didn't really know what it was. So we do a lot of that career exposure work so that they can understand what their different options are. And then we work a lot on, like, the young person themselves. Like, we do a lot of the, like, soft skills of, like, how working in teams, being able to give them the sort of tools they need to be authentic in spaces where they're going to be, like, one of the only people of color and, like, lots of different environments. How do you go in there? How do you be resilient in that? How do you deal with different challenges as they come up? We give them an idea what to expect, a lot of, like, quote unquote soft skills or social emotional learning. And then the other big piece of it is the young people really build a community, right? So they become close friends and colleagues and a support system for each other as they go on to do, fantastic things. So, so that's kind of what we do. So we are their support network through high school and then actually into college, because we do an internship program also kind of designed to give them their first internship right after, or sometimes right before they go to college, and then right after their freshman year. I want to give them that first internship, give them something to talk about on their LinkedIn other than being, a barista at Starbucks or whatever.
Yep, right. And so for the student, what's the cost? Or
we raised the funding to do this. I should have mentioned that the founders of the program, when I took it over, are a wonderful philanthropic couple, Mitch and Frida Kapor. Mitch founded Lotus a million years ago. They both have been very successful investors, so they fund about half our cost. We raise the rest of the funding. We get some contribution from universities around some of the cost. So essentially my long point is, like, we're dealing with low-income students. There is no cost to them for the program.
That's fantastic.
We supply them with laptops and connectivity and all that stuff also to make sure they can do it. There is no cost to the program to the student.
Wow, that's amazing. How does someone get involved in this?
To get involved with us, we have lots of opportunities on our website. There are opportunities to, mentor kids, come speak to our young people, to create experiences within your company where it's really good for young people to go visit companies and sort of see how things are going. There are opportunities to bring in our internship. We do them sort of as we call them pods, little consulting groups into your company if you're interested in that, with a project manager, so you don't have to manage 18-year-olds. So there's lots of opportunities to do that. Donations are always extremely helpful. So, and then there's a number of roles available on our website. We hire tons of both seasonal and full-time employees during, we have a bunch of full-time roles open. We have every year we hire as many as 500 seasonal employees, which can be a great way also. I mean, if you don't need the money or whatever, but if you want to, you're an expert in computer science or project management or one of these different things that can be really helpful, like guiding young people through that process for 5 weeks. Like we'd love to have career professionals come and teach. It's really valuable for our young people when it's not just academics. So that's our program. I'd say in general, if folks are looking to use their time and funding in a philanthropic way towards education, yeah, I mean, I would say like one is to like find something that you are genuinely passionate about, like something that you want to do. I think one of the hard parts of doing any sort of philanthropic work is if you feel like it's a burden, it's just going to be more difficult for you to sustain. So if you're doing it out of some sense of duty rather than like genuine interest, I think it's hard for you to sustain. I honestly would say just give your money, not your time, if you're going to do that, because time is harder. You know, time is, for many folks and many of your listeners, is going to be more precious than money, even in many ways. But if you find something you're really passionate about, I'd totally advise it. And that could be like your local elementary school, your local, you know, a lot of people find things that in their backyard that are easy. Or if it's a subject matter, you can find an organization that lines up with that. But you should be really passionate about whatever you're going to give your time to. You should want to do it. That'll just help sustain. I think, you know, I mean, the other part, the big hard part of this, to be totally frank, in education is, you know, like there's just so many macro level changes and so many, there's kind of a wall between, I'm just going to get a little philosophical. There's like a wall between the people that have made it and the people that haven't. And the question is like, what do you do if you're on the quote unquote right side of that wall? You know, are all of your actions, choices, the things you vote for, the things that you push for in your local school, are they about making that wall taller, or are they about sort of pulling people over that wall? So, you know, look, like I'm liberal. I live in a very liberal state, in the most liberal city in that liberal state. And still the blind spots that people have around the choices they make that are restrictive for lower income students are dramatic, right? There's lots of people that they think they're, you know, look, I voted for Obama. I care a lot about, they got Black Lives Matter signs in their lawn. But the choices that they make around their kids' education, what they push for at their school, are negatively impacting low-income students actively. And a lot of people don't see that. Well, I'm just arguing for my student. You know what I mean? Like I've seen, you know, I was on an email thread where a mother was advocating for the kids to read Harry Potter books over Nate the Great. I don't know if you know these books. I think it's called Nate the Great. But like basically that's like a graphic novel, and then Harry Potter's Harry Potter. And she was like, our kids can read Harry Potter. How come they're not? Blah, 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 blah. And the reason is like, look, there are kids who can't read that yet in this class. And the question is, who do we focus on? But her pushing, bringing that energy, that sort of like involvement, the pressure that creates on a teacher to look away from these low income students and like, all right, I'm just going to try to get this lady to shut her mouth and really focus on her kid, like that, there's a real impact to that. So I coming back to your question, like really, I think it's all good for all of us to sort of look at, like if we've quote unquote made it, or we're on the right side of the wall, like how do we actually create more opportunity, and how do we make sure that the choices that we make aren't making that wall taller and decreasing opportunity for people less fortunate than us?
I love that answer. It is philosophical, but I think it's a good framework to, because like to your point, it's hard. We look out for our own kin, right? Like family first, but I guess like you don't want to be, you know, hypocritical at the end of the day too with some of your actions. So I like that way of looking at it.
And it's like, look, like I have a kid, and it's like it's hard, you know, it's really hard. You know, you have to push yourself like a little outside of your comfort zone, you know, because, you know, everyone wants the best for their kid. And there's nothing wrong with that as an instinct, you know, but we have to examine how that impacts others in our larger community. And then we have to have a long-term view at all this stuff. Like, what's the world we want to live in? What's the world we want our kids to live in?
Yeah, sounds like we should expand our definition of family.
That's interesting. Yeah. I like that. I like that a lot.
I'm like on the verge of tears for most of the episodes so far. Speaking of capital, you said you wanted to do well and to do good. And I have to say, a year ago when I saw you in your fancy car, I was shocked because my idea was that all NGO people gotta be living hand to mouth. How did you do that?
Yeah. So, a couple thoughts. So, one of the things, the program, eventually I worked at the Broad Foundation, but what Broad had set up a program that called the Broad Residency, which was designed to attract people to be competitive for people like us who are coming out of business school or who are coming from industry to go work in education. So he was paying, you'd make somewhere between 85 at the time in 2004, $85,000, $100,000 a year to come work in education, which was like, for a starting MBA salary, obviously not the highest salary, but not like, I'm not eating bologna sandwiches every day, right? So there was his push was to like really attract, to sort of pull in different types of talent into the management level of education, because with the theory that like these people that are, there's some stuff that's like education, and then there's a whole bunch of other stuff that's kind of business. And so like if you want a CFO, like you should hire a really good CFO, and that costs money, right? Or else you're going to get maybe not the best CFO. So there was a big push around that time from him and from some other organizations in education to attract people who had like private sector expertise into the nonprofit sector. And part of that was sort of more equitable compensation of these folks. So that's, one huge shift that occurred. So this isn't, my path is not one of like someone that worked at the Peace Corps and worked their way up. There definitely are leaders that have done this and who live in a far more responsible way than I do, or restrictive way than I do. But there are, in the last few years, there has been much more of a push of like, look, if we want to keep really talented people, we have to kind of pay for them. There has been that shift occurred, and I benefited from that for sure early on. One of the things I can remember, just being totally honest, when I left the Broad Foundation, one of my goals was to be like a CEO and also to make $200,000 a year. That was like one of my goals. I was like, I'm seeing other people do it, and I want to do that. And this was in 2010, I was like, I want that. This is one of the things I was like, I'm trying to achieve that, and got there. And, so there were things that was me setting a personal goal in a context where I knew that I could kind of, based on the organizations I was dealing with, I could kind of pull that off. So there was that shift of like paying leadership. I feel like a lot more organizations nowadays, specifically, it depends a little bit on where you are. So I would say like the international NGOs, maybe not, but like if you're a nonprofit in the Bay Area, you can't live out here, without paying people. Like my middle level people at my organization make $100,000 a year, roughly, which is still tight in the Bay Area. It's still roommate money in the Bay Area, but it's more than what you would have seen a long time ago, and still more than you would see if you're working in like really developing nations, that kind of stuff. But yeah, I think the general belief is like, if you're going to attract really high quality talent, like you can't totally ask them to sacrifice it out of some notion of altruism. Like they can't stay once they have families and once they have stuff. Now look, the second part of this is the choices that Eli makes as driving a fancy car and like playing golf and whatever. Like I don't know, this is like part of the things that I sometimes talk about with my therapist about. Like, this is the like, okay, like, I mean, I'm just being honest. Like, the things I enjoy are a little different than what you would think. You'd think that I would be this. I'm talking to you guys about nonprofits and how much I care about these different things, and then at the same time, I'm like, yeah, but I really want to play golf, and like, being honest, like,
Yeah, being real.
there are times I feel bad about it, and then there are times when I just have to enjoy the things I really enjoy.
Well, it sounds like to me, it sounds like it's a reasonable price to pay. Like the brackets that you named is a really good trade-off between choosing a career that you resonate with and that you're really passionate about versus sucking it up and going to a job that will pay more, conceivably, maybe multiple, but you may end up burned out in a few years.
Yeah, I mean, I talked to one of someone actually who's at Wharton not long ago, and they were debating whether they should go directly into the nonprofit space or go, work in banking. And I was like, it's a personal choice. Like, you can have lots of impact by going to work at Goldman Sachs and like doing your thing, and then cross back over, be part of boards, maybe take a leadership role later in life, donate, whatever. It's sort of like, well, what can you do? Like, I couldn't be at Goldman Sachs. Like, I just couldn't, and that's about me. That's not about anybody else. So like, I like to be like, oh, I'm this like good person who blah, 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 blah. But like, some of this is just like, it's like behavioral economics, or whatever. Like, it's like, I do get value out of being part of this. I like it. I enjoy it. Again, like, I need a little bit of money because I have some tastes that are maybe a little fancy or whatever. But like, I mean, I say this all the time. Like, if someone came to me and were like, oh, okay, we're going to offer you, 2x your salary, I'd say like, oh, how much more time do I have to give up? What do I have to do? It's not, I wouldn't say, yep, sign me up. Like, I don't care. I don't want to it's not about that for me. Now, there are other people where it's like, look, they get really excited about the analytics or the power base of investment banking, maybe the money, whatever. Like, that's fine. Like, that's a personal choice. And if you still really care, it doesn't mean you don't care about your community if you go do that, or care about community overall if you do that. Like, you can still drive a lot of change from those perches. The one thing I'll say is, like, and this is a macro philosophical point, is like, humans aren't really paying for the right things right now. Like, we're spending a lot of money and making people, like, we concentrate a lot of our wealth and our rewards for our highest levels of talent for things that are not the highest level of societal benefit, if that makes sense. Right.
Yep,
So like,
yep. But you know what? I'm so glad you brought this up because this is something that I think about all the time. But something that you said earlier, I mean, what was it called? The Broad Foundation that you worked at. Essentially, it seems like, I mean, that gives me a lot of, it makes me very optimistic that there's some trending in the right way. Things like Teach for America, where they're specifically recruiting from top universities to get high talent in education. I think that it does seem to be, at least there's like some progress in the right direction. But with this overall big philosophical challenge that we have, where do you feel like the onus is? Like, is it at the individual level? Like, we need to wake up and like start doing more things on the individual level? Is it with the governments? Do these big banks, big tech companies need to, like, where do you kind of see, like, where does the change happen?
That's a great question. I don't know. I mean, Gandhi, right? Like, be the change.
Right.
But I mean, I don't know how. I'm not sure exactly how we got here. Like, how we got to a place where we migrated. Where basically, someone has to make an irrational choice if they're doing societal good. Like, where our incentives became so misaligned. Like, basically, if you should maximize the rational choice is to maximize your personal outcomes, and that's become so far askew from maximizing societal outcomes. I don't know how we got here. And the funny thing is, like, I don't know if this is like a halfway step or whatever, but I mean, to your point, like TFA, Broad, whatever, the notion that we can realign the economic incentives to the social incentives, I think is possible. Like with a certain set of philanthropists and choices and whatnot. Like, I mean, and that might be something I would do if I was a high level philanthropist. Would be like try to figure out, like, how do I convince this friggin' genius, or how do I make it less of a personal cost for this genius to work, in a lab trying to develop a cure for cancer than going to a bank? Like, how do I align that? How do I make him not have to starve, and like, so that he can do that instead of going to work at a bank? If I had billions if I was Jeff Bezos, like that's a problem I would take on, of like trying to shift the way the economic compensation works, or create a system that would make that choice much more rational for a really smart, talented person. That's still a Band-Aid. I mean, I guess my hope is that that's just sort of realigning the economic system. Somehow, as a society, we have to start valuing different things, and I haven't read enough philosophy to tell you how that works, because it's like some combination of religion, governmental leadership, or institutional leadership, whether it's governmental or not, and some other things. But that's like, how do we become more moral as people? And like, I haven't read enough.
It seems like a good start, though. You call it a Band-Aid. I see your point, because it's not addressing the core of the issue, but I feel like that's at least a good start.
Yeah.
Fascinating stuff.
Yeah, I know.
Well, taking it back, I guess, to Wharton, we like to ask this question of our guests. What would you say, if you had to complete this sentence? Wharton is a place where blank.
I think Wharton is a place where you can interact, learn from, and become friends with brilliant people. You want me to keep going?
Yep. No, I think that's a great succinct.
Nice.
Yeah, I had a great experience there. I'm very thankful I was able to go there.
Eli, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, happy to do it.